I was 7 months pregnant when my sister looked me in the eye and lied to my face and smiled while she did it. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, married to a good man named Daniel, and carrying our first child after 3 years of trying. 3 years of doctor's appointments, of negative tests, of quiet crying in bathrooms where nobody could hear me. So when that second pink line finally showed up, I thought the hardest part of my life was over. I didn't know the hardest part hadn't even started yet. My sister's name is Renee, 2 years older than me, always the one people described as the strong one, the smart one. I was just Claire, sweet Claire, quiet Claire, the one who didn't make waves. Growing up, I told myself that was fine. Somebody has to be the quiet one, right? Somebody has to just let things go. I let a lot of things go. When I got pregnant, Renee was one of the first people I called. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt, and I heard her voice catch, just for a second before she said, "Oh my God, Claire, finally, I'm so happy for you." I believed her. God help me, I believed her completely. What I didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, Renee had lost her job. Marketing director, 6 years at the company, gone, restructuring, they called it. And Renee, who had built her entire identity around being the successful one, the one with the corner office and the framed degree and the husband who bragged about her at parties, Renee was falling apart. Quietly. The way people do when they're too proud to say it out loud. I didn't know that my joy, my pregnancy, my full, round belly, it was sitting right next to her emptiness. And some part of her, some part I never wanted to believe existed, started to resent me for it. It started small, the way it always does. She stopped calling as much. When I'd mentioned doctor's appointments, she'd change the subject. I told myself she was busy. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the dinner at our parents' house. The one that, looking back now, I understand was the beginning of everything falling apart. We were all sitting around my mother's table, and my dad was asking about baby names, and I was laughing, actually laughing for the first time in weeks without feeling guilty about being happy. And Renee just watched me. I caught her expression for half a second before she smoothed it over. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was hunger. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, voice light, too light, "it's funny how easy it was for you." The table went quiet. "Easy," I said. I remember laughing, thinking she was joking. "Renee, we tried for 3 years." "I know, I'm just saying," she shrugged. "Some people get everything handed to them eventually, even after they mess around for years." My mother said her name sharply. Renee laughed it off, said she was just teasing, and the dinner moved on. But something in my chest didn't move on. Something in my chest sat there, cold, the rest of the night. Daniel noticed it too, in the car home. He reached over and took my hand off my belly and held it. "She's jealous," he said quietly. "Don't let it get to you." "She's my sister," I said. Like that word, sister, was supposed to mean something that protected me, like blood was some kind of armor. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, the way termites eat a house, quiet, invisible, until one day the whole structure just gives. It started with money. Our parents had set aside a small trust, meant to be split between me and Renee when they passed, nothing extravagant but meaningful. A cushion, something to help whichever of us needed it. When I got pregnant, my mother, without telling me, bless her heart, mentioned to her lawyer that she wanted to update the trust, to make sure some of it was earmarked specifically for the baby's future. Education, medical costs, that kind of thing. She told Renee first. I don't know why. Maybe because Renee called more, even if the calls were hollow. Maybe because my mother, without realizing it, was trying to keep the peace before it even broke. Renee did not take it well. She called me that night, and I could hear it in her voice immediately. That brittle, controlled tone she got right before she said something cruel and pretended it was reasonable. "So Mom's changing the trust," she said. "No hello, no how are you feeling?" Yeah, for the baby. Renee, it's not." "It's not what?" "Not a big deal. Easy for you to say. You're the one getting a whole new person to inherit everything." That's not fair, I said, my voice shaking already. Pregnancy, hormones, grief, exhaustion, all of it rising in my throat at once. I didn't ask her to do that. Didn't you, though? Renee's laugh was sharp, humorless. You've always been good at that, getting things without asking. Everyone just falls all over themselves to give Claire what she wants. I sat down on the edge of my bed, one hand pressed to my belly, feeling the baby shift inside me like even she could sense the tension pouring through the phone. I don't know what you want me to say, I whispered. I don't want you to say anything, Renee said. I want you to understand that some of us have to fight for everything we get, and you've never had to fight for anything in your life. She hung up before I could answer. I sat there for a long time after that call. Daniel found me still sitting on the edge of the bed, phone loose in my hand, staring at nothing. What happened? He asked, kneeling in front of me. I told him all of it, and when I finished, he didn't say, "She's just jealous this time." He looked troubled, really troubled, in a way I hadn't seen before. "Claire," he said slowly, "I think you need to be careful with her right now. She's grieving her job. She's scared. People say things when they're scared." "Yeah," Daniel said, "but some people also do things when they're scared, and I don't want you carrying that stress. Not now." I told him he was overreacting. I told him Renee loved me, that we'd fought before and always found our way back, that blood always found its way back. I want you to remember I said that, because it matters later. It matters a lot. 2 months passed. I was 8 months pregnant, exhausted, swollen, glowing in the way people say pregnant women glow, but mostly just felt like carrying a bowling ball strapped to my spine. Renee had gone quiet, not fighting quiet, just distant. I told myself we were healing. I told myself the worst had passed. Then my mother called me, crying, and told me Renee had asked to borrow money. A lot of money. Money my mother didn't have to spare without dipping into the very trust meant for my baby. And here is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My mother said yes. Not fully, she gave Renee part of it, told her the rest would have to wait, that she needed to think about how it would affect the trust for the baby. And Renee smiled, hugged her, said thank you, told her she understood completely. Then, 3 days later, my mother called me again, except this time her voice wasn't sad. It was confused, frightened almost. "Claire," she said, "did you tell Renee you didn't want the baby's portion of the trust anymore?" I remember the exact spot I was standing in the kitchen when she asked me that. I remember the sun coming through the window, warm and yellow, completely indifferent to the way the floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "What?" I said. "No, Mom, why would I say that?" There was a silence on the line, a long one. "Renee told me you called her," my mother said slowly. "She said you told her you felt guilty taking money away from her when she needed it more. She said you wanted to give up your share so she could have it." The room was spinning now. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I never called her. I never said that." And that was the moment, right there in my kitchen, 8 months pregnant, one hand braced against the counter, that I understood my sister hadn't just been jealous. She had been planning. She had used my name, my voice, my supposed blessing, to take something that was never meant to be hers to take. And she had done it so carefully, so believably, that our own mother hadn't questioned it for a second. I hung up the phone with my hands trembling, and I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, feeling the baby kick against my ribs like even she knew something was wrong. Daniel came home to find me still sitting there in the dark, the sun long gone, the kitchen light never turned on. "Claire," he said, flipping the switch, "what happened? What's wrong?" I looked up at him, and I don't know what my face looked like, but whatever he saw made him drop his bag and cross the room in 3 steps. "She lied," I whispered. "Renee lied about me, to Mom, about the trust." Daniel went very still. "What did she say?" I told him, every word, and when I finished, his jaw was tight in a way I'd rarely seen. "This isn't jealousy anymore," he said quietly. "Claire, this is something else." I wanted to believe he was wrong. I wanted, more than anything, to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding, some version of this where my sister hadn't just quietly stolen from my unborn child and pinned it on my own name. But 3 days later, I would learn the truth went so much deeper than even that. Because Renee wasn't just after the money. She was after something I hadn't even considered she could touch. 3 days after that call, my mother invited me over for lunch. She said she wanted to talk face to face, away from the phone, away from Renee overhearing anything. I remember driving there with my hands tight on the wheel, my belly pressed against it, feeling the baby roll and turn like she could sense my heartbeat racing. My mother opened the door, looking like she hadn't slept. "Sit down," she said. "There's something else, something I didn't tell you on the phone." I sat at that same kitchen table I'd grown up eating breakfast at, and my mother slid her phone across to me, open to a text conversation. Renee's name at the top. "Read it," my mother said. "I need you to see this yourself." The messages were from weeks earlier. Renee, writing to our mother, saying she was worried about me. Saying she'd heard from a friend of a friend that Daniel had been distant lately, that maybe things weren't as perfect in my marriage as I let on. Saying maybe I was leaning on the pregnancy, on the trust money, on everyone's sympathy, because deep down I knew my marriage was falling apart and I needed a safety net. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands had gone cold. "None of this is true," I said, my voice cracking. "Mom, none of this is true. Daniel and I are fine. We've never been better." "I know that now," my mother said, and there were tears in her eyes. "But I didn't know it then. She had me scared, Claire. She had me thinking I needed to protect you, protect the baby, make sure there was money set aside in case things fell apart for you." I understood it then all at once like ice water down my spine. Renee hadn't just lied about the trust. She had built an entire narrative, quietly, patiently, over weeks, designed to make our mother believe I was the one in crisis. Not her, me, so that when she asked for the money, it wasn't jealousy. It was concern. It was Renee being the strong one again, stepping in to help, while secretly dismantling my life and my finances and my family's trust in me, one manufactured lie at a time. She hadn't attacked me directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she'd gone underneath me, quietly hollowing out the ground I stood on until one day it simply gave way. "Why?" I whispered, more to myself than to my mother. "Why would she do this?" My mother reached across the table and took my hand, her own hand shaking. "I don't know," she said, "but I know now. And I am so sorry, Claire, so sorry I believed her before I called you." I want to tell you I screamed. I want to tell you I stormed out, called Renee immediately, confronted her right then and there. But that's not what happened. What happened is I sat very still at that table, one hand on my belly, and I felt something inside me shift, not the baby this time, but something in my chest. Something quiet and cold and absolutely finished. I didn't call Renee that day. I didn't call her the next day either. Instead, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I stopped trying to smooth things over. I asked my mother to send me copies of everything, every message, every conversation about the trust, every dollar that had moved. And when Daniel came home that night, I told him everything, and for the first time, I didn't ask him to be patient with my sister. I asked him to help me protect our daughter. We went to see a lawyer that week. Quiet, careful, no drama, just facts laid out on a table. The trust technically still belonged to my parents, which meant Renee hadn't broken any law taking money my mother willingly gave her. But the lawyer was very clear about one thing. If Renee had knowingly misrepresented my words to manipulate my mother's decisions, and if there was a paper trail proving it, that mattered. Not just legally. It mattered for what came next in my family. 3 weeks later, I gave birth to my daughter. 11 hours of labor, and when they placed her on my chest, wrinkled and furious and impossibly small, I forgot, for just a few minutes, that any of this had happened at all. Daniel cried. My mother cried. And I held my daughter and thought quietly, I will never let anyone do to you what my sister tried to do to me. Renee came to the hospital 2 days later. I remember her walking in with a gift bag, smiling, saying congratulations like nothing at all had happened, like weeks of quiet betrayal, simply evaporated the moment there was a baby in the room to perform for. I looked at her for a long moment. My mother, standing near the window, went very quiet. "Renee," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "I know what you told Mom, about my marriage, about the money." Her smile faltered just barely. "Claire, I don't know what you're—" "Don't," I said, just that, one word. And something in my face must have told her I meant it because she stopped talking. "I'm not doing this here," I continued, glancing down at my daughter sleeping in my arms. "Not today, but I need you to know that I know all of it, and things are going to be different now." She left the hospital that day without another word. And for a long time afterward, things were quiet between us. Not peaceful, just quiet. The way a house is quiet after a storm has passed through and left the wreckage behind for everyone to see clearly for the first time. Here's the part people always want to know. Here's the part they call karma, though I've never loved that word. It makes it sound like the universe reached down and did the work for me, when really it was just consequences. Slow, unglamorous consequences, catching up to a person who thought she could outlie the truth forever. 6 months after my daughter was born, Renee's carefully built image finally cracked in front of the one audience she could never fool completely, herself. The money she'd taken didn't fix what she thought it would fix. She was still without a job. Her husband, I learned much later, had grown tired of the tension her bitterness brought into their marriage, tired of watching her resent a sister who had done nothing but exist happily nearby. They separated quietly that spring. And when she finally reached out to me, not to apologize, not at first, just to talk, I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream at her, didn't list every lie back to her like ammunition. I simply told her the truth. "I loved you my whole life," I said. "I forgave you for a lot of things growing up because that's what sisters do. But you tried to take something from my daughter before she even had a name. And I don't know how to just move past that like it didn't happen." She cried, really cried, not the performative kind I'd grown used to. She told me she didn't recognize herself in the months after losing her job, that watching me become a mother while her whole identity crumbled had turned something ugly in her that she didn't know how to stop once it started moving. I believe that, actually. I believe grief and jealousy can turn people into versions of themselves they don't recognize in the mirror. But understanding why someone hurts you has never been the same thing as excusing it. We are not what we were. I want to be honest about that because this isn't a fairy tale, and I refuse to tie it up with a bow it doesn't deserve. Renee and I speak now, carefully, at family gatherings, at birthdays. She has met my daughter. She has apologized more than once in ways that felt real. But the trust that broke that year in my kitchen, staring at those messages on my mother's phone, has never fully rebuilt itself. Maybe it never will. Some things, once you see them clearly, you can't unsee, no matter how much you want your family to look the way it used to. My daughter is 3 now. She has my husband's eyes and everyone says my stubbornness. Sometimes, watching her sleep, I think about that version of me sitting at my mother's kitchen table, cold and shaking, learning that even the people who share your blood can decide quietly that your happiness is a threat to theirs. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because somewhere out there, someone is sitting at their own kitchen table right now, staring at a phone, realizing a person they trusted has been lying to their face for months. And I want them to know what I know now. You don't have to explode to protect yourself. You don't have to scream or cut people off in dramatic fashion or become someone you don't recognize just to survive someone else's betrayal. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is exactly what I did. Sit very still, gather the truth, and decide quietly that you will never again mistake someone's need to be near your life for someone actually wanting you to be happy in it. My sister never saw it coming, not because I planned some elaborate revenge, but because the moment I stopped performing forgiveness before I even understood what I was forgiving, everything about our relationship changed. That was never karma swooping in with justice. That was simply me, finally, choosing myself and my daughter first. And I have never once regretted it.